Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am your gracious host, Captain Frodo, and who would have thought? Well, you probably didn't know what you thought, but I didn't think that we would be releasing episode 16. I thought when we started this that we would just release 10 episodes, and as it turns out, I have a lot more to say about things than what I initially thought. And also the response for this in the strange times that we live, where still most of us have got nothing, got very little on the agenda. I just had a meeting with a colleague here in Norway, and it seems to be the same. There's practically nothing on the agenda. Things are being cancelled. Still think it's a little unfair how the bars and out these kind of places are allowed to open, and that theatres are not allowed to open, where people are sitting in chairs for a very specific period of time. But what has happened in this time that is interesting is that maybe it is also, of course, because I have been doing this and publishing these episodes with my thoughts in them. There's a lot of very interesting conversations going on, and I'm having several people all over the world that I'm having more or less intense ongoing conversations where we feel like we're touching on some very interesting subjects. So just started to play with that idea of recording some of those conversations, not so much having it as an interview where someone is telling the story of how they became who they were, but to actually explore ideas together with another person, so that there would be three of us. It'd be you and me and some other person who could also offer their perspectives. We'll see how that all turns out, but anyway. And I find myself coming back to this thing of this very special time here, where we have got less work than we normally do, where we are being afforded a chance to look at the world in a different way. As the audience has been taken away, I have certainly had a chance to reimagine my whole life and what to do with this time that's been given to us. And I have been saying, kind of, get into it, But there's also a strong argument, which I fully believe in, that this is also not some time to feel a pressure to do something, feel pressured to come up with the next great thing, or like we don't want social media to, be bringing us down with someone going, oh, and here I am, having written 6 novels and a play and all made up a cure for the common cold. You don't want that pressure on you. It's also a time to reflect and a time to sit still, like we've talked about before. To be still and do nothing for some time allows things to come in that are more important. But that said, having a project could be seen as, putting your head in the sand. You just want to keep busy and not take it. But side projects that that might have been a side project before, or something that you've just been interested in, might become a main attraction. And that can be a super healthy way to get release in this creative process. Because creating, as it is for many of us, is my life and my living. And having my main attraction, doing shows, being taken away, this empty spot, as it is taken up by something else, I am still doing the thing which I have been doing, like I'm making work to show others. And if you can think of a show being used, in the term a show being used as in a more extended way, I think of course, like I spoke about in the manifesto, as a showman as someone who's facing the other way and has something to show or share with the others. And I am, in a sense, from my soundstage here, facing you, and I'm perhaps bearing more of myself in these episodes than I ever have in my shows. So I'm creatively I'm then forced to continue the conversation with my ideas so that we can communicate with these in this episode. And the slow motion interaction there creates sound shows or radio shows. But this process of hearing back from people has, as I said before, started these interesting conversations. Some of them really just specifically about acts to do when everything opens back up to normal, but also interesting, more philosophical things. And the good thing with having a project that you delve into, as I know from some of these people who are stuck in, and I know a bunch of people who are stuck in Melbourne, which is in a terribly strong situation of lockdown, and I think they just got their lockdown extended by weeks, which is a difficult thing. But having a side project might make you still feel fulfilled, because it is a core feature of what artists do. The expression of that can be through your juggling or learning a new skill, developing ideas of how your work can be used as a tool to express something more, which is what I'm going to talk about today later on. And it was just very nice. I heard from someone who said, I have 1 hour outside every day in Melbourne where they're allowed to be, and then he goes outside and juggles, does his juggling practice, and he had been recommended to listen to my podcast, and that became kind of what he did for that 1 hour, being out in the freedom of being allowed to be outside his house to do the juggling, and also then listening to these episodes. So I guess that would afford a certain kind of freedom of the mind as well, and to expand into areas where it wouldn't normally go. Because even if you want to think or expect everything to go back to normal, how it was, there are benefits to this extra time. When you spend a period of doing something, like I went to a circus school called Circomedia in Bristol, an excellent course, but I could only pay for that with the money from my street performing. And anyway, it was just a 3-month course. But I came to this place as a juggler. But then I met these two incredible jugglers, like machine jugglers, both juggling 7 clubs and passing 11 and I don't know what. But it very quickly became clear to me that I couldn't really compete with that. I was not going to spend that much time in a gym. But as it turned out, I was having performed with my dad since I was about 10 years old and performed street shows, and I had a lot of stage experience. And my impro and performance classes, there I did very well. So I feel like after just 3 months, which is a sizable period, I came to the school as a juggler, as that was what I wanted to be, but I left 3 months later thinking of myself as a performer, which is what I today call a showman, being much more interested in the relationship with the audience and then the display of technical skills. But I arrived and got the 90 days, and that became a major boost of skills, and it gained me immensely. My juggling became better, and I left as a technically better juggler, but my identity had shifted to the better. I don't know, but it's certainly been a part of what has led me to where I am today. So it was a shift, and in this way I think this time as well, we don't know how much it will be and when it will go back, but when it does, we will all be pressured into this to doing shows again, and the race, and how you sort of compare myself. Oh, everyone's doing the jobs, and I have certainly been caught in this. I certainly joined the circus or whatever to not be part of the rat race, but there's part of me that goes, I kind of have fallen into that trap, having done 10 shows a week for 2 years, and last year I went for a while to Denmark, left Las Vegas to do these other shows, and I performed both a family show and an adult show with Circus Nemo in Denmark and Circus Barnley, where I was the circus director. So I took a break from the 10 shows a week to do 12 shows a week in Denmark. So I've been doing a lot of shows, and that's, I guess, part of what now I have realized that, okay, spending less, being more stationary, thinking more, has brought up all these other possibilities. Close, good family time here in Norway, and more time to think and to write and to have conversations and to interact with the potential for what it is that we're doing in the world. So, yes, I thought that there was just going to be this episode today and then next week, and that would be the end of season 1. But as it is at the moment, I have all sorts of ideas, and perhaps this will be a more ongoing thing than I thought, even if the format might change a little bit. I was wondering whether I should just, once I have done all these, the last couple of essays and other project that I want to do for one episode, then I might experiment what it is like to talk just off the top of my head as I have just been doing now, and see if that in some way can be interesting for you guys. So I'd love to hear if you had any thoughts about that, if you think that would be a good idea, what it would be like to not deliver a 40-minute essay each time, where we just talk a little bit looser, because somebody did say that they'd been listening to my podcast and it's like it's too good, was what the word that they used, but I was interpreting that as being too dense. It's like people like to do stuff. They want to fold some clothes, do the dishes, or maybe prune their roses whilst listening to the podcast, and that was difficult with this podcast because I have put a lot of ideas into it. I like my podcasts and conversations that I listen to online and whatever. I like that to have a lot of content. I also like to watch lectures online and whatnot. So I want a lot of content, but it might just be nice to have something which is a little bit more loose, like what these initial 10-12 minutes are at the beginning of these episodes. Anyway, if you have any thoughts on that, I would love to hear them. On The Way of the Showman, The Way of the Showman at gmail.com, or find me on social media. I'm either there as Captain Frodo or as Frodo Santini. You'll find me, and I'd be very happy to hear from you. And a lot of you have already spoken to me and contacted me like this in either an email or through social media, and I am ever grateful for the comments and the interactions. All right, that being said, let's jump into the world of ideas. As if we can change the world. Now, even after all the ways that we have looked at the Mythopoetic Carnival up until now, there's no doubt still mental hurdles in you as to how exactly to think about this place or metaphor. You might find that you still think of it as nothing but a mental construct, and in a sense, you're right. You're right, for at least you're right to be skeptical. I certainly sympathize with these feelings. I really like to take a skeptical or critical thinking approach to most things. I have these feelings exactly myself, and I think this is a good attitude towards anything, not just about this concept, but about most things, until we've looked deeper into them, seen what people who have read more and thought more about them, what they've done, or better yet, even that I have found a way to use it in my own artistic creation, which includes my thinking about the philosophy of showmanship. Through this integrative and participatory process, I gain a deeper understanding of whatever subject it is that I'm looking at and its usefulness. I'll get back to this. I make something mine through my own experience with it. Don't take my word for it, but what I'm proposing is not that you take it on a matter of fate, but that you explore it to see if it can be useful for you in your creations and interactions with the world. A skeptical approach is good for most things. Being slow to believe, taking the time to think and see how something connects to the world is a very good attitude, which is something we'll look more at. We'll look more at this whole approach in the next week's episode. But in the process, with interacting with something as existentially ambiguous as the mythopoetic carnival, we do need to be entering cautiously. Yet, to be able to get the full benefit of the interaction, we need to be a certain kind of open-minded. Not so open-minded that your brain falls out, but you need to be open to a certain kind of understanding. You need to let yourself comfortably remain in a space of not knowing. I think that feeling or attitude that allows this to remain within not knowing without getting irritated or angry, the thing that can solve it is curiosity. Staying within this space, curiosity allows you to stand in an uncomfortable space, but with this kind of attitude, you can feel comfortable within it. This mythic carnival foundation, as I have urged, is no less real than the sociological concept of the collective imaginary, which we looked at last week, and many other things, but it's still what can be called liminal, which means that it occupies a position on both sides of a boundary or threshold. And in dealing with liminal things, we need a particular kind of curiosity approach, or a curious approach perhaps. We need to go beyond the simple polarity of yes, no, real, fake. Instead, we need to move into a space where we instead, from my point of view, I think it's beneficial if you can explore instead whether it is useful. Curious or not, standing in the uncomfortable space of not knowing, trying to will curiosity can be difficult. It is for me. So today I will sketch out what to me is an interesting way to approach the mysterious, or the liminal, or for us along the way, the mythic carnival. It starts out with an idea from an unusual showman, and then anchors itself in a concept showmen and performance artists already know and use to a greater or lesser extent. And again, even though this is aimed at the Mythic Carnival project, it still is a concept of potential value to all kinds of complex thinking and interacting with ourselves and the world. So, to begin, we will step inside Anton LaVey's intellectual decompression chamber. But before we look at his concept, let's look at who Anton LaVey was. And this is already now, of course, as it will become clear, is again showing my passion and interest for the obscure, the occult, and bizarre and low life, if this will make sense in a minute. Anton LaVey's immediate connection to our project here might be that as he left school he took work as a roustabout with the Clyde Beatty Circus, which was run by the Clyde Beatty, who was a world-famous animal trainer, specializing in big cats, but also had hippos and polar bears. And Beatty was famous for the style of the shows that he performed with the big cats, and mixing animals together was a kind of fighting style, where he entered a cage with a whip and a pistol, the classic kind of old-school approach of unapologetically showcasing his courage and mastery of wild beasts. I'm sure he would don a chair or a stool as well. That's, at least in my mind, he would do that. And anyway, this was kind of this teaching the animals to make it look like they were angry with them. Risky business. Anyway, Anton LaVey was hired as a roustabout, but soon after meeting Beatty, showed promise in interacting with the big cats, the lions and tigers, and apparently he got to work with Beatty as an assistant trainer. And this could just be, a part of self-aggrandization or part of a personal mythology, but later in life, LaVey bought and kept and trained a lion, as one was allowed to do in the city of San Francisco, which caused quite a lot of ruckus with his organization later on. And eventually he sold it or gave it to a zoo, but that's beside the point. It's one little anchor that might say, well, maybe he wasn't so full of make-up stuff bullshit. After working at the circus, Anton LaVey took a job at a carnival, where he became the Calliope steam organ player for burlesque shows. Music is a big part of LaVey's work, and according to him, it was there at the carnival that his ideas for the person that he would come to be germinated. LaVey claimed to have seen that many of the same men attended both the bawdy Saturday night shows, and then come Sunday mornings at the other end of the midway, they took their families, their wives and children, to the tent revival shows, listening to preachers talk enthusiastically about the Bible. And this helped reinforce LaVey's increasingly cynical view of religion, a view which, through his occult studies and lessons he'd learnt people watching along the midways of American carnivals, that he expanded into a philosophy and later into a religion, a path of the left hand, as it sometimes was called. His quite rational and not supernatural religious ideas became manifested reality when, in 1966, he founded the Church of Satan. This is a very interesting topic of exploration. LaVey was absolutely a showman, and all his creations, religious, satanic, musical, his essays and his books, like the book called The Satanic Witch, can really be beneficially and fruitfully read by those interested in showmanship. Many of his ideas and concepts are useful and very fun, surprisingly fun reads. But for now, I want to look at an idea that he introduces in his seminal and controversial book, The Satanic Bible, from 1969. This is a book that actually goes beyond just being a polemic attack on Christianity. It's got some really interesting stuff in there. And as you now see, my fondness for the low and obscure comes to the surface as we bring Satan himself into the picture. And there's an attraction along the way. The concept that we're going to talk about is introduced in a chapter titled The Ritual or Intellectual Decompression Chamber. And I'll read a quote from his book, The Satanic Bible. The formalized beginning and end of the ceremony acts as a dogmatic, anti-intellectual device, the purpose of which is to disassociate the activities and frame of reference of the outside world from that of the ritual chamber, where the whole will must be employed. This facet of the ceremony is most important to the intellectual, as he especially requires the decompression chamber effect of the chants, bells, candles, and other trappings before he can put his pure and willful desires to work for himself in the projection and utilization of his imagery. The intellectual decompression chamber of the Satanic Temple might be considered a training school for temporary ignorance, as are all religious services! The differences is that the Satanist knows he is practicing a form of contrived ignorance in order to expand his will, whereas other religionists does not. Or if he does know, he practices that form of self-deceit which forbids such recognition. His ego is already too shaky from his religious inculcation to allow himself to admit to such a thing as self-imposed ignorance. Now, a lot to unpack there, really, and it's clear, of course, this was at the time, and there is a certain anti-religious sentiment, but just like the kind of freaky nature of any kind of freak show or sideshow attraction, you need that uncomfortable hook to get people's attention, and back in the day, he certainly got people's attention, and in the beginning, of course, it was mainly just people taking pictures of him when they were having all sorts of nude altars and a lion involved and all the devilry. There was just very... But inside all of these extraordinary and flamboyant things lie some very interesting thoughts, as this idea with the intellectual decompression chamber. Well, since LaVey's brand of Satanism is essentially atheistic, meaning that he doesn't believe in any supernatural deities, Lucifer himself included, he cleverly describes the start of his rituals as an intellectual decompression chamber, with the ringing of bells, the recitation of verses, and the chanting. This can all become triggers or a method to enter into a different mode of being. The beginning of the ceremony serves as a threshold into a different reality, into this space of standing in the uncomfortable, not knowing, but in a state of curiosity, and then beyond, into a certain conviction. The intellectual decompression chamber is a place where the rational mind can and must temporarily be put to rest, a state primed to receive lessons from the satanic ceremony. From his practical people studies, he knew enough about the human psyche to know that any rational thinking, even vaguely skeptically minded person, intellectuals, as he calls them in the quote, and also, of course, the most dedicated believer, when you find yourself dressed in robes, holding a plastic skull perhaps in one hand and a ridiculous dagger in the other, whilst swearing allegiance to this or that deity, there might, in a flash, you might become self-aware, asking themselves, what the heck am I doing? And thus falling completely out of the ritual, because as you fall out of the story loses all of its power. Like, in a way, Sarah in the movie The Labyrinth, telling Goblin King, David Bowie, in the end she realizes that what can break the spell is that to have all she has to say is, "You have no power over me." It breaks the spell, and with it the Goblin King becomes powerless. And when the make-believe stops, the power disappears. And with the ritual, one wants this power of the story. It's the purpose of the whole ritual. So to get the full effect, we need to relax our intellectual and rational mindset and get into a more mythic way of experiencing the world. And we can gain experiences we otherwise couldn't access. LaVey further believed that this mindset could have a palpable and real effect on the performer of a ritual's ability to enact his will, her will, in the world, to make her will, his will, come true. And that's what he says with him, employing your full will. So the chanting, the participatory movements and the music, the atmosphere in the ritual chamber was crafted with the explicit purpose of creating this mindset. By calling it an intellectual decompression chamber, he was pointing out in no uncertain terms that this would be a different approach to being, a non-rational approach. LaVey was convinced, as was many of his followers, that there was immense benefit to be gained from the rituals, even though one part of you knew that it wasn't, in any normal sense, real. But the rituals nonetheless had real impact on the practitioners' lives and those around them and the world around them. They didn't have to believe, as they went about their everyday life, in the complete reality of what was going on in each ceremony and ritual, for it to still have a very real beneficial effect. And the more you get into it, the more fully you can participate and express yourself in the ritual, or for us, in your circus act, or act of showmanship, the more you can get out of it. The more you get into it, the more you can get out of it. The more you wholeheartedly participate in the experience, the more fully your identification is with the experience, the more powerful the results. And here, the context is important. If you are told the myths of the Norse gods in a flat on the 9th floor of a high-rise looking out over streets filled with 7-Elevens and retail stores, you experience the myths very differently than if you sit around a fire deep in the Scandinavian wilderness. Similarly, having a real human skull to swear upon might help you over the threshold of complete willing suspension of your disbelief. Or if you are sitting before a guru and he can present a miracle of some sort, it might be easier to believe his connection with the gods, or whatever he claims. This again might make his healings or messages from beyond more believable, hence making truth happen and the efficacy of his work become stronger. This concept was and still is a feature of Aleister Crowley's occult social or spiritual philosophy called Thelema, and in his book Magick in Theory and Practice, he explains it like this, writing about what the book is. He says, there's a quote, "In this book it is spoken of the Sephiroth and the paths, of spirits and conjurations, of gods, spheres, planes, and many other things which may or may not exist. It is immaterial whether these exist or not. By doing certain things, certain results will follow. Students are most earnestly warned against attributing objective reality or philosophic validity to any of them." So there you go, Aleister Crowley, telling it like he sees it. There's this liminality again, it comes up in all of this stuff. Doing certain things, certain results will follow. This is the key kind of point in there. And doesn't matter whether it's real or not, they may or may not exist. LaVey's rituals can be performed alone or with a group of magicians, and each magician involved in a ritual could, in principle, have their very own purpose in mind as they invoke it. For our purposes, I believe there is benefits to extending the principle to include our audience. I do believe that in a very real way the audience is part of the showman. There can be no show without the two being present and involved in the process of showmanship. I think that in a very direct way we already apply the decompression chamber principle to our own acts and performances by facilitating the audience's suspension of disbelief, as we mentioned before. In the first few moments of our acts, we need to get our crowd to willingly step across the threshold of make-believe and invest in the story we're telling or showing, or else our act and the story will have no power. Before we sort of move on with this suspension of disbelief, let's just have a little brief look at will. So he mentions here in the quote, what does he say? He says, where the whole will must be employed. And this is a very important aspect of it. So before we move on, let's briefly look at the role of will and one's true will, as they call it, in the ritual. Because will is an important part of LaVey's philosophy, as we see in the quote, and this is also very much aligned with Aleister Crowley's definition of magic. According to Crowley, magic is to cause change to occur in conformity with will. To cause change to occur in conformity with will. There's a pretty straightforward kind of causing change to occur in conformity with your will. The ritual's purpose is to make the world conform to the magician's will, or make your will happen in the world. In this sense, the magic or ritual is very practical. To prime the full power of the will, one needs to wholeheartedly participate in the ritual. And this is the purpose of the intellectual decompression chamber, to aid the performer in being able to wholeheartedly participate in the ritual. And for our purposes of showmanship, this could be read as your act or show or any kind of work, even if you're not a showman, but you're just listening to this and you're actually a plumber or a marketing person, a coder. What do I know? What I do know is that if you are self-conscious and uncomfortable in your ritual or your show or whatever your work is, you can no longer effectively employ your whole will, which would make the ritual less effective, if not completely useless. And by useless, LaVey at least means that it would be nothing but the performance of a bunch of incantations and ritualistic pageantry. It would have no real effects on the world. And that's an interesting concept, that what would make it useless is if it was just an act, a ritual act performed in a basement, and it would have no further effect. That's useless. That's an interesting thought, because for LaVey, a strong desire for an outcome beyond the mere performance of the ritual, it's just paramount. Without a very specific motivation of emotional persuasion in yourself to gain some sort of result, the whole ritual is pointless. If we apply this to the performance of an act or a show, we might find ourselves reminded of a dimension many of us tend to oversee or forget in commercial work, that our acts might, or from a LaVeyan point of view, it should have an aim beyond just the performance. It should also have another layer, which is the effect the showman wants it to have in the world, specifically creating real world change in accordance with his will. It can be a valuable exercise to look at your act and to seriously examine what you want it to achieve in the world, for you personally, for the audience, and for the world in general. And this might sound abstract, but from my personal experience, it can have extremely practical and functional effects on your work. Taking your act seriously in this sense of it being a tool for you to cause change in conformity to your will makes your act a magical act, and it helps you focus yourself by clearly stating to yourself what your will and desire is with the performance. You're already well on the way to becoming an agent for change in the world. So let's get into this, how this sort of links up with suspension of disbelief, a very well-known and common theatrical phenomenon. LaVey's intellectual decompression chamber is extremely similar to the theatrical process of willing suspension of disbelief, which already is an important aspect of most people's performance, to some degree or not. In theatre, you don't have to believe that you actually saw the Danish Prince Hamlet inside a building in the West End of London. The process is a reality tunnel that you enter for a particular time and place to gain something from it. The audience knows that what they're watching isn't real in the strictest sense. No theatre or performance really is. But by willingly suspending their disbelief, they get access to Shakespeare's grand universe, a pinnacle of English literature or literary achievement. And with the suspension of disbelief, the spectators gain access to the scope of intellectual and emotional stimulation that Shakespeare's work contains. The higher the level of suspension of disbelief that we ask from our audience, the more carefully crafted and structured the initial moments needs to be, like how LaVey says the intellectual might need the decompression chamber the most, since the intellectual's threshold for suspending his disbelief in regards to a ritual or a performance might be a bigger ask, a bigger hurdle for them to suspend their disbelief. Hence they need to have more work being put into it on behalf of the performer. And the more you ask of an audience, the stronger your conviction in your material needs to be, or the stronger the process of the decompression chamber needs to be. In that lies the idea that through a strong conviction comes an enthusiasm in the performer which can light the enthusiasm in the crowd or in the spectators and give them a more complete, more participatory experience of the performance or the show. And by having what LaVey calls a formalized beginning and end to the ceremony, it, much like the opening of like the title sequence of a film, it lures you into a mindset so that you can get the most out of the film as fast as possible. Often when I looked back in the days when we watched DVDs, there were all these extras, and I remember like the insane amount of work that you could see that had been put into these opening titles. I mean, we see it in the James Bond movies or in movie 7, where all these details that you get this strange kind of, you get the feeling of what is being set up, you get to see the kind of props and symbols and details that later on you will see come out through the movie. So it really sort of gives you this dense symbolic introduction to it that hooks you in, and from the beginning of, as soon as the first image comes on the screen of the movie actual, then you will already know kind of how to look at it. Much like I talked about in the Clown Truth episode, where where I talked about wanting to deliver something that would put the audience in a frame of mind that so that they could look at what I did in a more serious tone, even though I might be a ridiculous clown. Anyway, there's real power in what we do on stage, and this power is strengthened, and its scope and potential grows by entering or inviting your audience into this intellectual decompression chamber where they willingly suspend their disbelief and then enter into a different mode of perception, a truly human way of taking in the world, 100% artificial and therefore completely human, as the Illuminated Shaman's Manifesto proclaims. Through having spent some time formalizing our intent, the aim of our will, this process, and through that we can create real changes, at least the potential is there, create real changes in people that goes way beyond what we could achieve by remaining strictly within this real everyday state of mind. And this, how this change happened, this brings us to the conclusion of this, which brings us to this as-if principle, which, as we shall see, can be a very powerful process. As if there's for our purposes here, the philosopher and psychologist William James, who wrote the varieties of the spiritual, what's that called again? No, I didn't write this down here, but the varieties of the religious experiences. I think that's what it's called. And he's a philosopher, psychologist, and he first proposed this idea that if you want to have a quality, you must act as if you already have it. And in the research of doing this, I found that this principle was explored in depth in a book by Richard Wiseman from 2013 called The As-If Principle. And from that book, I learned that this as-if, act like you have a quality and you will get it, that this actually stands up to empirical scrutiny. It's a real thing in the world. And Richard Wiseman, as a side note, he is a very interesting fella, and if you want a good introduction to what magic or secular magic tricks are, then he has written a book called Magic in Theory, which perhaps intended or not sort of links back to the book by Crowley. But anyway, that's a good place to start. Now he talks a lot about this effect and method and all these things, something that I talked about, I think, in episode 3, Secret Knowledge in Me. Anyway, he also got some excellent videos where he demonstrates and explains visual illusions, and they are just mind-blowing. I'll see if I can post some links in the show notes, but now, the as-if principle. For it's true that if you're happy, that you're happy when you genuinely smile. If you are happy, you smile. But as it turns out, it's also true that smiling, even just the pantomime of putting a smile on your face, I think in the test that they talk about in the book, you actually just put the pencil and just push it in behind your teeth to force your face into a smile. Then, when people ask later on, it turns out that people report that they are feeling happier. Maybe just for the ridiculousness, who knows? But there is a reciprocal process in the act of smiling. We smile when we're happy, but we can also become happy by smiling. And this is the principle in its simplest form, but it's not the extent of the power of this strange and for us highly relevant principle. And this also makes me think of laughter yoga. I'm not much of a yoga man, but for many years ago we were at the Circus Festival in Tasmania, Tony Rook's extraordinary creation, and Leroy Hart, an excellent leader of these laughter yoga workshops, where just a whole bunch of people are standing in a circle and going around and laughing, and the results of this are, even though it starts out and it feels quite contrived, as you move through these exercises and you're all laughing out loud and all this, your body just can't quite tell the difference between you actually having just the best time watching the most killer bit of physical comedy, or whether you are just doing it. So the results are the same, which links up to this thing going, you do certain things and it has certain results. So seeing is another aspect of this thing, is that seeing is believing, as they say, but as it turns out, saying can also become believing. If you behave like you believe in something and you say it out loud, that your opinions can actually change. Like, be careful with what you say, it might come true. Be careful what you say, but you might come to believe it. And I'm not saying that you should go and look at yourself in the mirror and say, you're an important contribution to showmanship and positive change in the world. But what I am saying is that if you did do this, chances are you might start to believe it. And this is an important fact for us show folk, as with sort of these practitioners, almost like rituals. We go through a lot of the same stuff. We spend a lot of time thinking about something in creating material. Then we spend a lot of time going over that material when we rehearse, and then ultimately when we perform. And the things we say and the things we do, if we might not have fully believed them when we first start saying them, we might find ourselves fully believing them and believing what we say after the 100th show. In this process, we have also fully embodied the message and ourselves as a delivery tool for it. And this, just off the top of my head, makes me think of Peter Sellers and actors who would take on these deep characters that might then ruin their personal relationships with their family because they had got obnoxious attitudes of some character they were playing. And they just take it on so much that that parts of it just sits in them like residue, that they think that the behavior of this character becomes a plausible way to act. And I think, we often say that a particular joke's ability to land with a crowd is dependent on whether you feel the comedian is telling her truth. And one reason why all acts become stronger as they are performed many times, as far as I see it, is that the showman's faith in his material grows. It becomes more and more true for him, even when the material and the structure of the presentation remains practically unchanged. The transformation in the character performing it makes a huge difference. The showman's faith in the material, how deep his belief in his material is, grows, thus making it more and more likely that truth will happen. And as we explored in the Clown Truth episode, truth is something which happens between the showman and the crowd. It's not that you can just say a true statement before the crowd and they all go, oh, that is true. It is something that happens in the meeting between the subject and the object, the meeting between the showman and the crowd. But the likelihood that truth will happen will increase the deeper the showman inhabits and internalizes the truth of his material. So, these are just some thoughts on the strange interlinked relations between the intellectual decompression chamber, the willing suspension of disbelief, and the as-if principle. All these are very interesting topics that I would recommend anyone interested to explore further and to utilize it in your work. And I would also recommend actually considering and taking up pen and paper and consider your act as serving a purpose in the world beyond just being shown. Spend some time and make some notes in your craft journal about what you desire, what your true will might be. What do you really want? And then consider, can your act become a ritual to cause change in the world? Righty right, we have once again arrived at the end of the episode, and I want to thank you for coming along the way with me this far. I think what we're doing here is very interesting, and from what I understand, it's a very good thing for people to discover, but it is not easy to discover, as I only really publicize it in a very limited way. This is kind of a great but secret show, so if you know somebody out there who are interested in thinking deeper about what we do, then do them a favor. Send them an email, a personal message from yourself, saying, this thing is something to be taken note of. Point them towards the show. I'm sure that it will be rewarding for them, and they might thank you for it, and perhaps some interesting conversations will ensue. So, that's all I want to say for today. Thanks for your time and attention, and until next time, take care of yourself and those you love, and I hope to see you along the way.